Awesome. Welcome, everybody, to the Writer's Bridge. I am Allison K. Williams, and my co-host over there, will you say who you are?
Yeah, I'm Charla Yates. Welcome, everybody. See, we have a lot of memoir writers in our chat, which is really great.
Yeah, especially because today we are talking about selling memoir without platform. By the way, if you are watching the replay, we are so glad to have you on the replay as well. And if you have a question that we haven't answered, feel free to type it next to the video in the comments, and we will answer that question later on if we at all possibly can. Charla, before we dive into the Writer's Bridge, we also co-host a series called Craft Talks, which is writing webinars. Charla, what's coming up in the world of Craft Talks?
Yeah, so as most of people here know, Allison is a juggernaut in her presentations, and we're going to have her Wednesday. That's tomorrow. It's closes at 1 p.m. Eastern time, so just be aware. It's moving from rejection to publication. It's what's wrong and how to fix it fast. Allison's actually going to live edit some participants' submissions. You're going to learn some 5 key elements to strong openings and how to express them in your own work, how to analyze whether your essay's working or not, and how to fix it. Good news, it's probably not your writing. That's the short of it, right?
Right? Like, I'm looking at these essays that people have sent in because they have bravely volunteered to have their work talked about live on screen. Every single one of them is a lovely writer. And with every single one of them, I'm like, oh, this is the problem. That's why this piece has 16 rejections. You got to fix this, this, and this. And as soon as you fix it, you're going to find a home for it. And it's so striking, I think, how much easier it is to see that in somebody else's work than it is to see in our own. Charla, will you introduce our first guest?
I would love to. In the wake of her husband's sudden death, Jessica Waite uncovered secrets he'd been keeping that undermined everything she trusted about the man she loved. Then, amidst the chaos and confusion of her new reality as a widowed single mom, inexplicable coincidences forced Jessica to consider whether Sean might be reaching back from the grave, trying to make amends. When life handed her a riveting, horrifying, and unexpectedly beautiful story, Jessica transformed herself into a writer. Her memoir, The Widow's Guide to Dead Bastards,
great title,
wonderful title, was acquired in 7 days in a preempt by Atria and an imprint from Simon & Schuster. She has no newsletter, no podcast, and 33 Twitter followers. You can find Jessica on TikTok. Just kidding, you can't. She doesn't have a website though, and she'll share it she does have a website though, and she'll share it in the chat.
Our next guest is someone to whom I have given one of my all-time favorite editorial notes, More Dead Dog. Put the dead dog right up front. This book is all about the dead dog. Dr. Karen Fine is a leading expert in the emerging field of veterinary narrative medicine and an associate veterinarian at Central Animal Hospital in Massachusetts. For 25 years, she owned and operated her own house call practice. And I mean, a house call vet, how cool is that? She's also certified in veterinary acupuncture and a graduate of the University of Massachusetts Medical School's mindfulness-based stress reduction course. She's the author of Narrative Medicine in Veterinary Practice, but her first book for a trade audience is The Other Family Doctor, A Veterinarian's Guide to Love, Loss, Mortality, and Mindfulness. And it debuted last month at number 13 on the New York Times bestseller list. Go, Karen. Charla, who's our third panelist?
Sure, and Michelle Bowdler is the author and public health professional. Bowdler's debut book is Rape, a Crime, a Memoir, an Investigation, and Manifesto, was longlisted for the National Book Award in nonfiction. Her work has been published in the New York Times, Literary Hub, Ms. Magazine, Psychology Today, Brevity, Hippocampus, and many others. Bowdler uses a blend of memoir, cultural investigation, and social justice frame in her body of work, and has been a fellow at MacDowell and Ragdale, and is recipient of the Barbara Deming Memorial Award, and twice nominated for a Pushcart Prize. She teaches writing at Grub Street in Boston.
And you should totally check out Michelle's classes. I have heard so many great things. And I have to also shout out to Kristen Paulson, who's here today, who's another wonderful writer and who turned me on to Michelle's work in the first place. So thank you, Kristen. So glad you're in the community. So what do all three of these amazing memoirists have in common? Well, only one of them was longlisted for the National Book Award. Only one of them, to the best of my knowledge, is a New York Times bestseller. And only one of them sold her book in under 2 weeks in a nice deal. What they have in common is no platform, no TikTok, no huge Twitter following, no podcast, no fame. And yet all three of them were acquired by traditional publishers in money-making deals. So what did they do to make big books out of small presences? Let's start by hearing a little bit about your journeys. Jessica, your book just sold. How did that process go? Did you sell it on proposal? Did you write the whole book? Just bring us up to date. How's it going?
Sure. Okay. Thank you. It's so wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for having me. My book, I had written the full manuscript. It took about 5.5 years to write. And I wrote the proposal after it was done, just before going on submission. And I think that there are two advantages to having the whole book done for a memoir writer. The first is that I was able to incorporate genuine reader response into the proposal. So how people were reacting to the book, which is, in a sense, the kind of social proof that I think publishers are looking for, in that, like, platform is one form of that, but there are other forms of that. And so I was able to tap into the reaction that people were having. And then the second advantage is that I'm not under a deadline to finish it now. If it had sold on proposal, I'd have a very tight timeline, and I was glad to have taken my time. So yeah, that's kind of where I am. Thanks.
Love that. Congratulations.
Michelle, your book takes a very personal experience and expands outward to how we as a society treat sexual assault. How did you choose the way of telling the story? Had you previously written it or narrowly, or did you always want a book with that scope? And did you sell it on proposal or write the whole book?
So, well, thank you. And I think it was a little bit of both. I did sell it with a complete draft, but people always ask me about the research part. And in fact, when the book went out on for querying with by my agent, two publishers were interested, and both of them wanted to have a conversation. And both of them said, have you ever thought about adding a little research? We want the book, we love the book, but we can tell by some of the themes that you're talking about that there is a larger, there are larger issues at play here, and that could better inform your story. And so the book sold right then and there when I said, sure. And then I spent about 6 months adding in research, and that's how the book was created. And I also wanted to say that when it comes to not having a platform, I think one of the things that I talked about in my proposal was that at the time that the book sold, I did have a lot of professional contacts. For example, the RAINN, which is the Rape and Incest National Network, has like 4 million people who follow them. And I was doing national activism work on issues related to what was happening with crimes of rape and the lack of investigation. And so I was able to say that I could tap into large organizations who would have an interest in this book, and not necessarily look at all the traditional ways that we all think we have to have, as 100 million followers on Twitter. I think I had 1,500 at the time, but that did not keep the book from interesting people.
Love that. Really love that. And yeah, and we'll definitely dive a little bit more into that with this idea of, social media, especially now with so much of social media fragmenting and disconnecting and changing. It's not really the be all end all. And there was really only a short amount of time where publishers thought it was the be all and end all. And then they learned that social media doesn't sell books, and no one can prove that it does in any way, shape, or form, because nobody walks into Barnes and Noble and goes, can you sell me this book? I saw it in a tweet. It's not traceable information. Karen, you originally went on submission. You queried one version of your book. You got a request for a revise and resubmit from an agent. who later accepted your book. How did you change your focus between the earlier version of the book and the revised version of the book? And did you sell on proposal or with the whole manuscript?
So I did sell. Thank you so much for having me. First of all, I'm so happy to be here. And I did sell on proposal. And what happened was I had queried a bunch of agents, and I had many agents request material and reject. And a lot of them said there's just too much death. I don't know where I would place it, that kind of thing. So at that point, I thought, okay, I'm sort of running low on the list. I'm going to I approach university presses. I may have to self-publish. I may not be edited, working with an agent. So then I thought, I really want to get it as good as I can get it myself. I felt like, okay, I need to work with an editor. And then I found Allison, who did a mini edit, and I said, I'm so excited. I really, really want to work with you. And Allison said, I'm only editing people that go on my retreats. My next one's in Italy. So my husband's name is Mike. And I said, Mike, I've got to go to Italy. And so I worked on it there. And I think some of the helpful things, Allison, was that I did have a couple of things in there that were just sad, and you pointed out they didn't move the story ahead. So working with you as an editor, I was able to kind of look at it with new eyes. I did add some new material, and I sort of got it where I was very happy with it. And then I queried the agents that I had remaining, and I wasn't really thinking about the revise and resubmit. And she was fairly vague. Like, she didn't say you need to do exactly this, this, and this, and then I'll look at it. It wasn't like she gave me a roadmap. But she loved what I had done. And this was only on proposal. I changed the proposal to reflect the manuscript. And it did sell on proposal.
That's awesome. Anne points out in the chat that one of the secrets to selling is email. I am definitely a proponent of email. Charla and I both use, you got to us through an email list. We use it to market Craft Talks. We use it ourselves. None of you had a social media platform when you started. Do you have one now? Do your publishers want you to build one, or did they want you to build one? Do you use an email list? What are the components of your quote unquote platform now? Like, Michelle, I love that you said the thing about it's not necessarily people clicking your tweets on Twitter. It's finding a large nationwide organization that empathizes with what you have to say, where you're partly telling their story as well as yours. Tell us about your platform now. What is it? How'd it go?
I'll answer that first. I mean, it is true that I do post a lot on various social media sites, often about my book or about topics that are of concern to me. My second book is going to be with Basic Books, and they are, while they're a traditional publisher, they tend to do really serious nonfiction books. And my publisher, who, she has 2,000 followers. She doesn't have 50,000 followers. And, I'm coming from Flatiron, where they have, 190,000 followers on Instagram. So I think that was not that much of concern to anybody. It was never really mentioned to me. What was important was that I would be willing to write essays, and I would be willing to publish, work on publicizing the book to the best of my ability. And that was more important. And I think for the second book, the fact that to be honest with you, the fact that the book was nominated for National Book Award sort of gave me a step in a little bit. But I don't know if that would have, if the same process would have applied, because I sold the second book on proposal, if I hadn't had some nice things happen to me from the first book. I don't know what I was going to say.
Can I ask about that proposal really quickly? Someone wanted to know about the testimonials you mentioned. Were they recognizable names, or were they just average people that you got to read your book? Average is meaning not recognizable, of course.
Was that for me or somebody else?
I think it's for you, Michelle. I think it's when we were talking about how you proposed it.
Yeah.
First.
Well, we're a part of a few of us on this call are part of the Grub Street community. And so, I was able to have Alex Marzano-Lesnevich say something about the book. They were actually my instructor. I was able to say that I knew, I knew Anita Hill sort of adjacently and hoped I would get something from her, or, mentioned some people that I knew through the college. I worked at Tufts University, and said, I think I could go, I know Jill Lepore because a friend of mine, it works at Harvard. And so there were people that I said I had contact with that I could ask, which is different than saying I will be able to get a blurb from this person or that person. And there were a few that I had that mattered. And yes, Kristen, you're absolutely right, that I was able to say these particular schools, 3 different schools that I had contacts with, would be interested in hearing more about the book as well. So that all did help, I think. And for the second book on proposal, I was able to give quite a number of quotes that I had from the first book. So,
Karen, I know you have a great email list now. I'm on it. I love getting your emails. What about you? Did your publisher ask you to establish more platform? Have you enjoyed establishing more platform? What's happened with that for you?
So they really haven't pushed me at all. And what I started out with, and I don't know if you'd consider this platform, was just a website. And the website was very helpful to me because as I began to publish some articles or to be interviewed, that was sort of a landing place where, if I wanted to send someone a link, I knew it was all right there in my website. And I also thought, well, if someone wants to know who you are, they kind of go to your website. And I'm really only on Facebook, and I'm now on Instagram, but I'm really struggling with Instagram. I never even tried Twitter. And I did what I have seen recommended a lot, which is to start an email newsletter. And I now have, I started with, I don't know, like a couple of dozen, mostly friends or family. I now have 700, which I think was just the publicity of that just happened within the last month or so since the book came out, because I have done a lot of interviews. I was on Fresh Air, and Fresh Air led to a 4-minute CNN on primetime. And I wrote an essay for the New York Times. And I was interviewed in Psychology Today, and I wrote an essay for Time Magazine, and that was all in the last, since the book's come out. So I think that's why it went from like 50 to 700, but they really haven't pushed me to do anything. It's been more, can you do this radio interview? I've done a lot of radio interviews, and I have more coming up. But I think, sort of looking back, and I took a class with Jane Friedman about doing your proposal, but I think we also talked about websites. So I've sort of had a website for a long time. And another piece of advice I got from Jane Friedman during that class was, well, if you've never published anywhere else, or if you've never published for your target audience, then you should really think about publishing for your target audience. And I had written an op-ed for my local newspaper about something totally different. I had written for veterinary magazines a couple of times, but not for my target audience. So I really took that to heart. And that, I think, was very helpful.
Wonderful. So Jessica, are you working with your publicist yet?
No, I haven't even got my editorial letter yet. So I'm still at the early stage of the process, but I did, Simon & Schuster has a big questionnaire that they get you to fill out. So I can see that they're thinking along the same lines as what Michelle and Karen have already described in terms of writing for other outlets and guesting on podcasts. And I've been doing some of that kind of stuff already. And my Twitter has gone from 33 to 38 followers since the announcement of my book. That's exponential growth right there. But I think for me, and just because I had a lot of different tracks to success in terms of what publishing success would have meant to me, that having a website as the starting out place where I could put, nice comments if somebody read part of my story, or that I could direct people to. It's the basis of an email newsletter that I might be starting. I'm going to drop a link to that in the chat. But otherwise, I'm kind of just starting out with all of that stuff.
We have a great question from Lisa in the chat. You all, Karen, you're a professional veterinarian. You have been doing professional veterinarianism for quite some time. Michelle, you are a speaker in the public health field. Jessica, do you have a credential, quote unquote, or are you, quote, just a regular person with a story?
I am a regular human, but I consider that a credential. And I think having lived my story is a credential, which is the same credential that each of us has. And one of the things that I have in common, I think, because having read Michelle and Karen's amazing books, is that there's a certain sort of vocational calling or tie-in. And so for me, I've spent a lot of time in grief spaces, in conscious dying spaces, and that type of place. So I have, trust networks, and I would never like market in a space like that. That is, but it's the same kind of thing where I have people who I know in an authentic way, who I can ask to support my book when it comes out. And so, yeah, that's the one kind of I think if you're living the why of your book, you'll naturally be connected with people who want to read it.
Yeah, we have a question in the chat about bylines. Did you have them, and did you publish shorter pieces previous to works prior to getting either representation or a publishing deal? Anyone can answer that.
I'll answer. So after Jane Friedman recommended it, I pitched Bark magazine. Actually, what I did was I went to Barnes and Noble, where they had a bazillion magazines, and I looked at all the animal ones, and I bought one of each, and I took them home, and I thought, which one would I want to be published in? And it was Bark magazine, which is now, actually the editor retired and sold the magazine, and it's called something else now. But she was very responsive. I ended up writing 3 articles for Bark. And then through an online animal writers page, I think I ended up in contact with another editor, and I published some other essays or articles in her magazines, which is called the Inside a Cat's Mind and Inside a Dog's Mind. And so that was very helpful. And then the other thing that I found helpful was being quoted for interviews. So I sort of started seeking that out, because that was easier, I found, to maybe get my name out there a little bit. Although I did tell someone that they could interview me, and then I found out after it was Weed Maps, and I was like, oh no. I don't know. I want to be associated with, animals and pot, but she was fine, and it was good. I just thought, oh my goodness, because we're actually not supposed to talk about marijuana for animals, even though everybody's got their dog on CBD oil and all that. So I would say, just if you are going to agree to an interview, ask what publication they're going to be publishing it in first.
Good wisdom.
Michelle?
Yeah, I wanted to just share a little bit about the kinds of publications I had before I was ready to try to submit my book, because I think it's important, because we all sort of feel like, where do we start? And I wound up submitting to magazines. I didn't even I didn't know if they were big, small. I really was quite naive and innocent about the whole thing. And I wound up with 2 pushcart nominations from magazines that probably had like 100 people who followed them, and one even became defunct. But according to my editor, she couldn't care less. I still was able to say I had 2 pushcart nominations. And my first publication, and only publication, was in the New York Times. And that was also like a sort of move that I made that was completely, probably, I thought it might have been inappropriate, but I did it anyway, because I knew I had got Nick Kristof, who's a writer in the New York Times, was writing a lot about the issue of rape kits. And somebody put him in touch with me, and he wasn't interested in putting me in his story because he was looking for a different timeline. But then when the Access Hollywood tape came out with Trump, I was so angry that I sat down and I wrote an essay. And then, I don't know if you know James Bond, but I entitled it Pussy Galore, and I sent it to Nick Kristoff. And in 2 hours, he said yes. And I was it was like, I didn't feel like, oh, who do I think I am? Oh my gosh. I was just like, I just had to send it to someone. So sometimes things like that do happen. And sometimes if you just put yourself out there, you might be surprised at what happens. And you don't have to know everything, like, oh, the Paris Review is a big deal, but this, magazine that has 50 followers, you should just ignore. Like, I think it all matters.
A great story.
Jessica, how about you?
Yeah, I love that. And I can build a little bit on just the idea of, like, we need to create our own momentum. And so however we do that, by like writing shorter pieces and finishing them, and then having the courage to send them out and be rejected. And so for me, because I was starting from like not being a writer at all, I did all of those steps, and each one, like, the courage muscle is for me the biggest one to develop as I was going along. And so I submitted to contests, like in literary journals, based on who the judge was, and knowing that if I made it far enough that person might read my work, made me really up my game and level up my writing. And I didn't win any of those contests, but I did make long lists and short lists, and that, like, so one story can help you to build up a writing resume, because having that blank writing resume is a really bad feeling. And so writing shorter pieces and placing them even with small publications, it will pay off very well for each of you in the long run, for sure.
I love that you're not waiting for permission, that you're just getting your work out there. And if people say yes, great. And if they say no, that's okay too. You'll move on to the next person. Charla, what's our next question?
Well, I have a question about beta readers. Does anyone have experience working with beta readers, and what is your advice you would give to others with working with beta readers?
I can talk about that. So I was in a writing group, and we shopped my manuscript 20 pages by 20 pages. But then at the end, I did say, can we read the whole book at once? And that was sort of a thing in my writing group where you took 2 months, and I printed out the manuscript for everybody. And I didn't get super helpful feedback. And then when I was working with Allison said, well, I can find you a couple of anonymous beta readers, but I think you should pay for them. And I said, fine. And I think that was really, really helpful. They each gave me like 2 to 3 pages of very helpful feedback, instead of just saying, oh, I really liked this and I really liked that. It was much more in depth. And that was very helpful. And I did really take their feedback to heart. So I think I don't know how much of a thing that is when people say I'll swap, versus, so it was sort of more like a book report. And that was great. And these were people that Allison knew. One of them now I know who she is, the other one I don't, but they both were sort of my target audience. So that was helpful as well.
And I just want to add a clarification to that. So generally, when we say beta reader, we mean that while you write the book, you do a bunch of favors for your writer friends and read their manuscripts, so that by the time your book is done, you have a group of people who you can say, hey, will you read my book? And you're not asking them for some kind of massive out there favor, because you read their book and helped them out. And that is usually free. One of the things that I've done as an editor is I also have people who do professional beta reads, where they are a paid reader, they're a stranger. And the one advantage to having a professional beta reader is you will get the feedback that you asked for. They will answer your specific questions, and they will return it to you on time, which you cannot always hound your friends to do. And your friends may not always be skilled readers. They probably have great feedback in terms of what they like to read, but it's a slightly different service, and it is just confusingly also called beta reader. So just FYI on that. So what would you say, Jessica, what's the best advice you've received so far about working in the publishing industry, or about the process of getting your book into the world?
I got the best advice that I've had early on, and it was to come in with the energy of equals, so that when you are querying, when you're meeting with a publisher, agent, whoever, that you come in as an equal to them, understanding that they are looking for what you're giving just as much as you are looking for what they can offer you. And I think that that paid off for me a lot with my query letter when I got the agent. It was the cheekiest query letter you've ever read in your life. And it was kind of like playful because the stakes were high, but I wasn't taking it, like hanging on to it for dear life, because I had an energy of equals. So sort of like what Michelle said about sending to the New York Times, it's like, you're going to, like, this is coming to you, you know? And so, yeah, that's it.
Can you talk
Michelle, how about you? What was your best or worst publishing advice as you move forward?
Well, I think I want to give a little advice. I sort of felt like I would have done, like when I said, oh yeah, I'll write some research, because I so wanted to be published and I was so excited. But I will say that I really have to put out there that people have to be kind to themselves and not lose their sense of what they're trying to write about, and that it matters, because publishing can be, or even the process can be, brutal. And, you know, when I hear about some of the things that people have been told, I was on a panel at AWP and I was with one of the most brilliant memoirs I've read. It's called Ma and Me by Putsata Riang. And she said she was told by several editors, this won't sell, genocide doesn't sell. She was talking about the Khmer Rouge and the in Cambodia. And how on earth a person could ever say that to somebody, it baffles me. And we all have, you know, I think your memoir is great, but I can't imagine how I'd sell it. It's something that everybody will hear. And it simply means you have not found the editor for you. It does not mean suddenly that your book is terrible and you should give up and stop writing. You should do the opposite. And I just want to really, really say that over and over again, because publishing itself was not fun. Publishing during a pandemic was not fun. Doing Zoom calls and hearing from readers, that was amazing. That was amazing. And when you're ready to publish, I really do encourage you to talk to people who have published about whether you should get your own publicist or whether you should get that publicist that the top 5 will guarantee you is going to be amazing and they're going to do everything for you. Because remember, they have lots of other clients and you want to really know that your best interest will be followed. So that, I'll be quiet, but that's some of my publishing advice.
That's great. Oh, Jessica, I think you're on mute.
No, I was interested about the publicist. I was like, say more, say more, Michelle.
So we've had a couple of questions about like the nature of your actual proposal. For those of you who are not super familiar, a proposal is a document that spells out who you are, why you're the right person to write this book, who the right readers are for this book, and how you are able to reach those readers. And that's kind of what we call platform. And there's a fair amount of material online if you take a look for it as far as like what actually is included in a platform. What else did you all include in your proposals in terms of, okay, so I'm not listing, I have 17,000 Twitter followers. What kind of stuff did you list in these are my connections, this is my platform, this is who I can reach? Michelle, you said, organizations where the people who are members of that organization share your concern. What else? What else should go in there that we're maybe not considering?
For me, think about the colleges that you went to, they all, or schools that you went to, or people that you've met along the way, who have, almost all of those have their own magazines, and alums look at it. So it's often from, 10,000 to hundreds of thousands of readers. That was actually, I could tell the book sold after if one of those happened. Thinking about, people who, if you in your work life have spoken at conferences, I did a lot of work around sexual assault related to my professional role at Tufts University, and I had to think about people in other places who would be interested in that. You sort of have to take a step back and say, what do I do? Who do I come in contact with? And who would be interested in what I'm doing? And you would be surprised. Well, maybe you wouldn't be surprised how and also in terms of being with Grub Street or being with the writing community, these communities are incredibly generous and people really do want to promote what you're doing. So those were some of the arenas that I look towards.
Karen, what went in your proposal as far as either audiences that you already knew you could reach or connections that you knew could help promote your book?
Yeah, it was almost like writing a resume, and then you're thinking, you know, I'm writing a resume, and I'm thinking, well, I don't know what to put on it. I've never won an award or whatever, and then you see someone else's resume, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, you know, they make it sound really good. So you really sort of have to dig deep and come up with these connections and kind of weigh everything and put it on there, and whatever connections you have. You know, like for instance, I wrote an article for, there's a golden retriever rescue league near me that's quite large. And I wrote an article in their newsletter, and one of my clients that I've known for years, a couple clients actually work in the organization. So I said, you know, listed that, which is valid, you know, but it's not something I think about all the time. So sort of just, you know, taking some time, I think, and putting down every potential connection you have that would be reaching your target audience. And it, you know, can take a little bit of time, and maybe talking to somebody who's very good at, you know, helping other people sell themselves, because I think a lot of times, especially as writers, we're not that good at that. And, you know, just talking it through with someone who you know well, who might say, what about this? And what about that? And that kind of a thing. So just looking at it with new eyes, maybe.
Jessica, you're our person whose credential is your story, which I love that way of putting it. What did you do for listing stuff in your proposal for audiences who you can reach or people who can help support your book?
Yeah, I'm not sure how it occurred to me to do this, but I organized my marketing section by cultural taboo. So my book sort of takes on 4 different social taboos, and I realized like every taboo has a built-in appetite for some truth around that topic. And so I listed each taboo. I sort of framed why each of them was like on the verge of a zeitgeist moment, and then I said some way that I had into that community or that space. So like one example would be I find out that my husband has a pornography addiction, and so I'm writing a bit about that. And I have a friend who has a podcast called Good Girls Talk About Sex, and so I was able to just sort of name the thing and then how we might go in through me, and then that gave them probably ideas of how they might go in through their own channels. And I think that was probably one of the more effective parts of my proposal.
And I want to add 2 quick things to this. The proposal is not just the document that sells your book to the agent who then uses it to sell your book to the publisher. Your proposal is also your marketing plan. So even if you're self-publishing, even if you're hybrid publishing, it is worth your while to make a proposal, because in the hubbub of publication for my own book, I was like, oh man, I should probably speak on some podcasts. And I didn't have to start researching a whole list of podcasts because I had listed podcasts in the proposal and started listening to a couple episodes every so often of each podcast so that I would already be familiar. For those of you who are religious, remember that your religious network may be part of your potential audience, and not just your particular temple or church or mosque, but the larger organization. Many religions have larger organizations, and those organizations have mailing lists and newsletters. Remember that if you have graduated from anything, you are an alumni. Remember that your hometown newspaper from wherever you grew up or wherever you live now is probably more interested in you than they are in random other author. And so these all belong as well. Charla, what's our next question?
Well, we're talking about these great ways of marketing and positioning your book, but I had a question about mistakes you might have made is there anything you would have done differently or you plan to do differently with your next book? Maybe we'll start with Karen.
So I really don't know. And it's funny because now my editor and my agent want to talk to me about writing another book. And I really don't know. It's not that I never thought about writing another book, but I really want to write another book so I can go to another one of Allison's retreats. But I don't know. I can't really think of anything that I would do differently. And it was, the sort of the time up to publication was somewhat, I was somewhat anxious because I like things being laid out fairly neatly and to know what to expect. And it's a difficult time because no one, I think, really knows what to expect. And even the publicist and editor and agent don't really know what to expect. Like I was thinking, well, how much time should I take off? Should I take off the week before it comes out? Should I take off the week after? Nobody could really answer that for me. And I think it's, you don't know. Sometimes these things come in very quickly. And when CNN called, I got an email. And first it was, they want you to go on tomorrow. And then they changed it to that same day. And my husband was like, but it's not time sensitive. Does it have to be this weekend? And I was like, well, I think when CNN says, this is when they want you on. And it worked out because I think that's why my book hit the New York Times bestseller list, because it was fresh air, and CNN, that was all the publication week. So to go back to the question, I can't think of anything that I would do differently. But it's really, it's so individual. And I think what's helped me the most is all the connections from everybody else and the whole writing community. And a couple times I've posted on, Facebook groups and just got some real wonderful, feedback about, you're not alone. If you're feeling a certain way, odds are other people have been there. And even if you don't want to write something yourself, you can Google something and read about other people and how they've dealt with it. So I think that's what would be my advice.
Wonderful.
So in terms of mistakes, I think comparison is something that only makes you feel bad. I think it's really important, or it's important for me this time, to remember why I wrote the book and not necessarily use publishers. I was with a group, a publishing that publishes a lot of celebrity memoirs, and they also have an Oprah imprint. And so I'm not a celebrity. And it was very easy for me to feel diminished, as opposed to just, wow, this is awesome. Like, this is an amazing experience, and to enjoy it for what it was. So that's what I've really told myself. And I am also happy to be with a different group, because that was a hard experience for me. I think in any way that we compare ourselves to other people, because we all are unique, like, oh, you got this, but I didn't get on that, that is just going to hurt you, and enjoy what you're having. I mean, the fact that you're all on this call means that you're part of a community, means that you're engaged in your work, means that you are trying to think about what you want as a writer or an author. And that's fantastic, because what we were always told in our class was that the biggest issue for people not publishing is attrition, because they stop. And as long as you're not doing that, you should just feel fantastic. And I know that might sound a little bit optimistic, but I really do believe it.
Yeah, I love what's been said already. And I'm so early on, my mistakes might be in front of me, which is a hard thing to think of. But if there's one thing that I maybe would have done differently, it's I changed the title to the current title, something more provocative, very late in the game, like right before we went on submission, assuming there would be time to sort of soften that with my family. And then because the deal went through so quickly, I had to basically say, here's the title and this is being published. And that was a lot for them to swallow because, you know, there's a question of legacy and speaking ill of the dead. And I really loved my husband. And so that, like, I just want to like make sure you wouldn't spend like 5 years writing a book about someone if you didn't love them. And so anyway, so the repercussion among my family members was harder than I wish that it would have been. So that's my one little mini regret.
I love that. So looking back to when you first started writing your story and all these ups and downs in between, what are your goalposts for success and have they changed since you first started writing? Karen, what does success look like now?
I think that's such a wonderful question. And I started writing because I work with my ideal reader every day. So my ideal reader is someone who their animals are really important to them. They're family members. They're just really important to them. They're very valued by them. So it doesn't matter if they have a lot of money and they're, you know, paying for all kinds of stuff for their animals. Their animals are their family members. And I wanted to kind of say things to that audience. So that was my definition of success. I wanted to get it out there. And you just don't know what's going to happen, I think. And I've been very fortunate. I have worked very hard, but I've also been very lucky. And I definitely realize that. So it certainly could have been, you know, a small press or university press. And then I wouldn't be probably wouldn't be a New York Times bestseller or whatever. But you know, it's just, I guess, reaching who you want to reach. And I have had some really lovely feedback, even the comments. Everybody says don't read the comments, but I think with my type of book, I've certainly had some comments that maybe left me scratching my head a little bit, but I've read some wonderful comments, and that's been really lovely, that to feel like, okay, I've helped this person feel better than they did before they read the book. That's wonderful.
That's beautiful. Michelle?
I agree with all of that. And for me, it was that I said exactly what I wanted to say and felt like I was speaking about something that I had a lot of thoughts about for myself, but shared it with the world and actually felt, or, you know, with people who read the book. And it really mattered to me to hear even one person, let alone way more than that, say, this book gave me something that I didn't know that I needed, and it really helped me feel seen. And that really meant everything to me. And also that the writing itself was taking back something that I felt had been taken away from me. And so that I feel like I just came back to myself in a way that I haven't felt for a very long time. And that has felt really good. So to me, that was success.
Love that. Love that. Jessica?
I agree with what has been said already. And of course, there's part of me that's very nervous about whether my book will sell and if I'll earn up my advance, like those types of like top line things that I know will be important to the publisher. But to me, having finished is like I've already succeeded in finishing writing it, and having read Karen's and Michelle's books that are both amazing. Each of them has a quality about it that I would give it as a gift to someone, as a way of saying, like, I see you, or like, you know, so someone who got a new puppy or someone who was going to have to put their animal down. Like there's things in that. It's a way of recognizing something. And so if someone were to give my book as a gift in the way that I would give their books, that would be success to me. Oh, so emotional.
I absolutely love that. And I think that's so true, because I got to say, there was a conversation on Twitter the other day about how selling a book is not actually a large part of most people's income. Like the book is a credential that lets you speak, that lets you teach, that lets you reach people in a way you want to reach people. But I feel so successful every time someone leaves a review on Amazon that says I helped them finish their book. So Karen, I'm with you. I think it's really about getting to the people who are your ideal readers. Charlotte, do we have another question?
Yeah, Carolyn asks, in terms of the marketing section of your book proposals and how you position yourself without large social media platforms, I had heard large organizations' media context essays. Is there anything else I'm missing?
Well, you want to have a comp section. So that's something that you want, and that's can be a little hard because you want something that it can't be like, I don't know, Obama's memoir or something like that. It's got to be something that's not like Brene Brown or something like that. That's sort of more, on the medium-ish level or whatever. But you want it to have sold enough copies that the publisher who's looking at the proposal or the agent says, oh, okay, so it's like that book. And mine was sold as it's a cross between sorry, I'm just blanking, the James Herriot.
All Creatures Great and Small.
Oh, thank you. All Creatures Great and Small and Being Mortal. And that's really what my heart feels the book is about. So I think don't be afraid to do that, because I've seen a lot of those. It's this meets this, or it's a cross between this and that. And it can sound silly, like you feel like, oh, come on. But I think agents in particular, anything that tells them in an instant what your book is, if you can find those two right things that really tells you what it is, then I think that can be very helpful for them. So that is something to think about if you have those two right things. So going in the proposal, there's a lot of books will tell you there's a marketing section, there's chapter summaries, and that took a lot of work because you want that to kind of showcase your writing. So you don't want to just have like a, sort of staccato sentences. You want it to sort of, the proposal has to tell a story. So you have an introduction and you're trying to showcase your writing. So, and I did work on that a lot with my agent before we sent it out. We probably worked on it for 4 to 6 months.
Wow, that's amazing. And Louise points out in the chat too, one of your comps, Karen, is about 50 years old, and goes to show, the standard advice of only within the last 3 years doesn't always apply. Sometimes you just got to look for what's the door in. When I sold my book on proposal, my book is a writing craft book, and I included books that were more than 5 or 10 years old because one of my comp sections was headlined "Craft Books Sell Forever." So the whole point was, hey, this is a really old book, but it's still selling and selling and selling. Because generally, the guidance is you want the comps to be recently published, and ideally you want them by debut authors, because the point of comps is to show people would like to buy my book, and people out there are buying those books.
Right. And mine also, All Creatures Great and Small is on PBS now. So, and they had done something with it, I think it was back in the 70s or the 80s, but the fact that, it was a current PBS special, it was new, at the time, that made it also reasonable, even though it was decades old.
That makes a lot of sense. There's a current hook there. So as we approach the end of our episode, we do always want to ask you, what are the things that a writer in our audience can do today to improve their writing career, get themselves further along on the path, feel better about their work? And we'll come to you three in just a moment for each one of us to give you your top tip of the day. Some of you may have noticed we're skipping breakout rooms today because there's almost 300 of us here. So I don't want to let anybody get stuck alone in a breakout room and not be able to rescue them because I can't get through the list fast enough. Before we get our top tips from our three panelists, want to let you know that we hope you will join us again next month, and we would love to see your suggestions in the chat for what next month's topic should be, because we have not yet decided what that will be. We want to remind you that there is a Craft Talks webinar tomorrow that I'm teaching, and there is a Craft Talks webinar almost every week that we strongly encourage you to join. They're really reasonably priced webinars and lots of fun. Charla, What is your top tip from today?
I would say everything that was already said was amazing. And I think it's such a great reminder to think about why it is that you're writing and what motivates you, and to perhaps even go to Barnes and Noble and look at the bookshelf where you think your book would be and see what's next to it, and imagine that it's already there, but also use that to inform who your audience is and how to reach them. And congratulate yourself for being here today, because you're doing the good work.
Absolutely love that. And please do feel free to share the replay of the episode with all your writing friends. Jessica, what is your top tip for writers today? What can they do today to get a little further down that path?
I think one of the things is like daydream about the impact that you want your book to have, because that will help keep you going all of the million times that you want to quit, like I did. And then if you know about the impact and you see something like that, we were talking about comp titles. I comped to this recent book, Jeanette McCurdy's I'm Glad My Mom Died. And I wrote in my section, what Jeanette McCurdy's book is doing for mothers and daughters, my book will do for husbands and wives. And so instead of comping for plot or theme, I'm comping for impact. And if you're in touch with your impact, then that will be like a through line for you.
That's a great thing to look at. I love that idea, comping for impact. Michelle, what's your top tip as these writers move into their writing lives?
I have two quick ones. One is, don't be mean to yourself. If you're tired one day and you don't feel like you can write, it doesn't mean you're never going to write again. You can read that day or take a walk. And sometimes just taking the time to think about what you want to write about is working. So be nicer to yourself. And the other tip is to be the best literary citizen that you can be. Give back to others, go to their events, tell them you've read their books, put things in Goodreads and Amazon to help their books sell, and they will remember that. So give the kindness to others that you would like to give back. So that's my tip.
I love that. We call that deposits in the bank of goodwill, as Andromeda points out in the chat. Karen, what's your top tip as we move back into our writing lives?
Those are great, and I love those. I love both of those. So what I did at some point was I wrote down reasons for writing, and I just did some bullet points. And I ended up with about 11, and I cut it out and I sort of put it right next to the computer so that sometimes, if I was sort of feeling lost or something, I could focus on one of them. And just as examples, they start with like to share experiences, what it's like to be a vet, to normalize the human-animal bond, to normalize grief after pet loss, to increase respect for animals, to explore issues around euthanasia. So those are sort of things like to explore, to compare, to share, to help. So that was helpful to me as an exercise. And if I lost my way, it was helpful to just kind of look at that list. So that's something that, if you wanted to do that as an exercise, it might be helpful.
I really, really love that. And I love what our three panelists have said about stretching your courage muscle, about not waiting for permission, about getting your work out into the world with an eye for the readers who need your work. Because in the long run, platform is really nebulous. But what's specific, what's real, what's important is that there are people who need your story to understand their own story. And one of the things I truly believe is that those of us who have the ability to sit down and write, whether that's a level of privilege or a level of talent or a level of determination, those of us who have the skill to put together a whole book, those of us who have the courage to tell our story, it is our moral imperative to tell our stories on behalf of the people who cannot tell their own story. They don't have time. They don't have the skill. They believe in themselves. They don't have the talent. It is our job to reach those people and uplift them by telling their story that is also our story. I hope you will take that into the world. Thank you so much to our three amazing panelists. We will include links to all of their books in the follow-up email, and you will get the replay email tomorrow or the next day. Please feel free to unmute yourselves for a joyful goodbye. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank
you.
Thank
you. Bye.
Thank
you, Allison.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Awesome.
panelists.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Karen and Jessica.
Thank you.
Yay. Thank you so much. Karen, I love you so much. Jessica, I love you, and I cannot wait to love you more as I get to know you more.
I love you too. Bye,
I
everyone.
hope to see you in another retreat, Allison.
Gosh, I hope so. I'm getting actually ready to do an alumni retreat in Italy too, where there will be way less like touring and less structured and much more like let us sit around in the same room and write with each other.
Do you have to be an alumni?
Yes.
I've already been twice. I might think about Costa Rica.
Oh, yeah, there is Costa Rica. I just came from there. It was nice. There were sloths.
I would love to see a sloth. I've never seen a sloth.
They're really cool. They're really, really neat looking. I was surprised by how filthy dirty they are because they're disguised. They're supposed to look like a big bunch of moss in the tree so that the giant birds of prey do not come and eat them. They're covered in like lichen, which I did not expect. I was thinking, soft and fluffy, and nope, they are covered in moss.
Oh my
I just texted my husband about your Tuscany. I just texted him. I looked up your Tuscany trip. It sounds amazing.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
It was amazing. It was amazing. When
I'm serious.
I went back.
I think, I'm going to try to convince him like today, and then I'll email you.
Awesome. And partners are also welcome if he would like to come as well. And we already have one husband who's coming, so he would not be the only one.
Good. Awesome. Yes.
Thanks. I'm glad you're interested.
Listed on your website? Are they listed on your website?
Rebirthyourbook.com.
That's still okay.
Yeah, rebirthyourbook.com, and they're all linked from there. Thank you. And thank you guys for promoting me. I deeply appreciate it. So, and Mimi's coming to Italy this coming year. So you'll get to meet Mimi in person.
Thanks. Awesome. I've got to go to work. Bye.
Bye. Make animals happy.
I'll try.
Bye, guys. It's great to see everyone.
Yeah. Bye.